killer blizzard. Chapter 1. The scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air as Anne rushed through the halls of the county hospital. She was late leaving her nursing shift, having lost track of time restocking supplies. Emma would be waiting for her medicine and meal at home. Anne burst through the exit doors into the cold night air, frigid wisps curling from her lips with each hurried breath. The forecast called for a heavy snowstorm tonight, but the roads looked clear for now as she made her way to the parking lot. She hoped they would stay that way long enough for her to get home. Turning the key in the ignition, and cranked up the heat and headed out of the parking lot. She drove as fast as she dared, anxious to get back before the storm set in. Emma had seemed weak and feverish that morning, and Anne knew her condition was continuing to deteriorate. The doctors said there was nothing more they could do. That's why Anne had brought Emma home against medical advice 3 weeks ago. She believed she could care for her daughter better than the revolving door of hospital staff, and just had to keep Emma comfortable and stable. And, most importantly, she had to hide any evidence of how sick Emma truly was, or the doctors would force her back into the intensive care unit. Anne's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as she pushed the accelerator down further. She had to get home. Emma needed her medicine, and her next 4 line changed. Anne could hardly leave her alone all day, even if she wasn't ill at just 18 years old. Emma required constant care and supervision, unable to feed or bathe herself. Anne had already arranged for her neighbor Donna to look in on her a few times today, but Donna thought Emma only had a minor cold. She didn't know about the constant 4 medications Emma now needed, or the true severity of her condition. No one could know. Anne's phone buzzed in the cup holder. Glancing down, she saw a text from Donna. Emma's fever was worse, over 103. Donna said she seemed confused and asked if she should call an ambulance. Anne's stomach dropped as she grabbed the phone, texting back not to involve anyone else. She was on her way. Her foot pressed the gas pedal down as far as it would go. Outside, snow was starting to swirl, small flakes catching the headlights in mesmerizing patterns. The roads were still clear, but she knew that wouldn't last. Gripping the wheel, Anne drove on through the gathering storm. Chapter 2. Anne pulled into the driveway, parking crookedly amid her haste. The snow was falling heavily now, already covering the ground with several inches of fluffy white. She leapt from the car and scrambled to the front door, keys in hand. Inside, the living room was dim, the curtains drawn. A lamp cast a faint glow from the corner. "Emma?" Anne called out softly. She shut the door behind her, stepping further inside. A weak cough came from the bedroom, and rushed through the door to find Emma lying in bed, cheeks flushed crimson against pale skin, hair matted with sweat. She crossed the room in quick strides. "Oh, Emma," she murmured, resting her hand on the girl's forehead. Burning hot. She caressed Emma's cheek tenderly, heart aching at her daughter's deteriorated state. Over the past few months, Emma's health had rapidly declined, her body weakening day by day from the mysterious, undiagnosed illness. Once a vibrant teenager, now she could barely lift her head from the pillow. It pained Anne to watch her daughter, once so full of life and promise, suffering this way. But she could not let Emma go back to the ICU. The cold, sterile hospital had done nothing to improve her condition last time, and knew she could provide better care here, keeping Emma comfortable and, most importantly, keeping her illness hidden from the doctors so they wouldn't force invasive treatments on her fragile body. And had sacrificed everything to care for Emma at home. She had used up all her paid leave at the hospital and took on extra nursing shifts to afford Emma's expensive medications not covered by insurance. She had cut ties with friends and family who might report Emma's condition to the authorities. The secrecy isolated them, but it was worth it. Emma was in good hands, her hands, not the impersonal revolving door of hospital staff. "I'm here now, sweetheart," Anne whispered, taking Emma's limp hand in both of hers. "Let's get you feeling better." She bent down to press her lips softly to Emma's clammy forehead. Then she turned and began preparing the next 4 medication dose and changing the line. As she worked, she continued murmuring comforting words, more for her own sake than Emma's. Her daughter's glassy, half-open eyes seemed beyond hearing, and had to keep up this delicate balance, providing diligent home care while hiding all outward signs of Emma's illness. She could trust no one, not even well-meaning friends. The stakes were too high. If word got out about Emma's condition, Anne would lose her for good. Her daughter's life depended on secrecy, and would do anything to protect her. Anything to keep caring for Emma at home. Chapter 3. And secured the fresh 4 line into Emma's arm, taping it down gently. She stroked her daughter's hair. Her touch lingered longer than usual, not wanting to leave her side. But the driveway needed shoveling before the storm got any worse. And layered on her warmest clothes thick wool socks, snow boots, insulated coveralls, hat, gloves. She would have to work quickly. Glancing out the window, it was hard to even see the driveway now through the dense white flurries. She squeezed Emma's hand, promising she'd be back soon, and forced herself out the front door into the blizzard. Icy winds swirled around her as she grabbed the shovel and started her work. The heavy snow made each scoop difficult, her muscles burning with effort. She kept her head down against the biting cold and focused on making steady progress. Nearly an hour later, Anne was only halfway up the driveway, the walkway and her car now buried in foot-high drifts. The snow showed no signs of letting up, the sky filled with ominous dark clouds. It would only get colder, the driving winds piercing through her clothes, and began to worry she'd made a mistake attempting to shovel. She glanced back at the house, thinking of Emma inside, sick and helpless. What if the power went out? The winding country road leading to their house could fast become impassable. They might be stranded alone for days. And reluctantly decided she needed to get back on the main road soon before the storm worsened. She could call Donna again, tell her to keep checking on Emma through the night. Make sure the generator was working in case electricity cut out. Abandoning her half-finished shoveling, and trudged back inside to grab her bags and keys. Emma appeared even more ashen and fragile than before, her breath shallow. It tore at Anne's heart to leave her like this, even for a night. But driving was becoming dangerous, the storm at its peak. She had no choice if she wanted to get to the hospital for her shift in the morning. Gently kissing Emma's clammy forehead again, and promised she'd be back first thing. She hooked up a new 4, hoping it would keep her stable till morning. Reluctantly, she dragged herself away, turning up the thermostat on her way out. Outside, the winds howled as she loaded up her car. Icy gusts bit through her clothes and deep drifts gripped the wheels as she navigated down the unplowed driveway. Finally reaching the main road, she drove with white-knuckle focus, wheels skidding on slick spots. Snow swirled relentlessly, reducing visibility to just a few feet ahead. Anne clenched the steering wheel, creeping forward. Getting home would be impossible tonight. The only hope was to keep inching towards town. The deadly blizzard was the perfect opponent, threatening everything in its path. but Anne was determined to conquer it. For Emma's sake, she had to. Chapter 4. The snow was coming down hard and fast now, the windshield wipers barely keeping up with the barrage of flakes. And eased off the gas as the wheels lost traction again, fishtailing on the snow-covered road. She'd only made it a couple miles, the way ahead fully obstructed in the whiteout conditions. Peering through the blizzard, Anne could barely make out the contours of buildings up ahead. She appeared to be on the outskirts of town, but not close enough to any hotels. The darkened structures around her looked like shops and offices, all closed given the late hour and storm. Anne's mind raced through her limited options. Trying to drive further was treacherous, almost zero visibility and tire traction. But she couldn't pull off the road either. The drifts were already too high. She'd have to find somewhere safe to hole up until the storm passed. And strained her eyes, searching through the snowy chaos for any sign of shelter. Even just an overhang or covered porch would suffice. Then, squinting into the storm, she spotted a faint light emanating through the trees about 100 yards off the road. A house or cabin set back from the roadside, and eased the car towards it as close as she dared. She'd found her shelter for the night. Grabbing her emergency bag, and pulled her hood over her head, secured her gloves and pushed open the car door. The icy wind tore at her clothes as she staggered through deep snow towards the light, using trees to shield when she could. It was slow, grueling progress, but she finally reached a clearing containing a small, run-down cabin. One single light glowed in the front window, her source of refuge. Exhausted and half-frozen, Anne stumbled onto the front porch. She could worry about who lived here later. Right now, she just desperately needed to get out of the deadly storm. And knocked loudly on the door. No response. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. Trying the handle, she found it unlocked. "Hello," she called out. "I'm sorry, but I need shelter from the storm." Only silence answered. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside was a simple living area with a couch, wood stove, and kitchenette. No signs of life. And ventured further inside and closed the door firmly against the howling wind. "Is anyone home?" she called again. "I don't mean to intrude, but I'm seeking emergency shelter." When no one responded, she decided the place must be abandoned. Maybe a vacation home based on the sparse furnishings. Regardless, it would provide the cover she needed. Shedding her icy outer layers, and positioned herself by the wood stove and held her numb fingers over the merciful warmth. In her focused quest to drive home, she'd lost her gloves, exposing her hands to the deadly cold. They stung sharply as feeling returned. She rummaged through cabinets until she found some canned soup, which she heated on the stove. The warm meal helped steady her nerves and energy. No telling how long she might be stranded here. Huddling under a musty blanket on the small couch, and finally allowed herself to rest. She needed to regain her strength for the journey back home through the snow to Emma as soon as the blizzard passed. This shelter was simply a necessary stop, aligned with her plan. She would conquer the storm just like any other opponent. For her daughter, she must. Chapter 5. Morning light filtered through the cabin's dusty blinds, rousing Anne from a fitful sleep. She blinked against the glare, momentarily confused about where she was. Then the previous night came rushing back. The blizzard. Seeking shelter. Emma home alone. And leapt up in a panic to look outside. Snow was still coming down, though not as heavily. Hardly a break in the storm. The driveway remained buried under deep drifts. She cursed under her breath. Clearly, the blizzard had its own sinister agenda, thwarting her at every turn, and didn't know how much longer Emma could last unattended. Yet she remained trapped, the snow showing no signs of stopping. Just then came a loud knock at the cabin door, startling Anne. Who could be out in this remote area in such deadly conditions? She approached cautiously as a second knock came. "Hello," a female voice called out. "We saw your car out front, please. Can we take shelter here too until the storm passes?" Anne hesitated, wary of strangers. But refusing help to someone in need went against her conscience. She unlatched the door to find a middle-aged couple, man and woman, covered in snow and shivering violently. They hurried in, thanking her profusely. "Our car slid off the road a ways back," the man explained breathlessly. "We've been trying to find shelter on foot for over an hour." "I'm Aiden, and this is my wife, Clara," he said, and nodded reluctantly. "I'm Anne. Make yourselves comfortable." She motioned to the couch. "Any chance we could get some hot coffee?" Clara asked through chattering teeth. "I can hardly feel my fingers." And forced a polite smile. "Of course." She went to the kitchenette and started boiling water, keeping a close watch on her two new companions. They seemed harmless enough, but their presence complicated things. All she wanted was to get home to Emma. These strangers were already consuming her precious time and resources. Soon, two more loud knocks came at the door, and opened it to find two young men, also seeking refuge. Brothers, they said, named Jason and Scott. Their car had slid off the road into a ditch a few miles back. With nowhere else to go, and again reluctantly welcomed them in. The small cabin was growing crowded now, with 6 people crammed inside. She served piping hot coffee all around, wanting to maintain goodwill. But inwardly, she was full of turmoil. The longer they all stayed, the more questions her new companions would ask. Where was she headed in the storm? Why was she traveling alone? And if they learned Emma was home desperately ill? Anne could imagine their well-meaning interference. No, the only way to get back swiftly was to get these people out of here as soon as weather permitted travel. That surely aligned with their wishes too. She just had to be patient. For now, the deadly blizzard held the upper hand, blocking all passage with its heavy snow. But its cruel plan would soon fail, and would find a way back home. For Emma, she had to. Chapter 6. Morning passed into afternoon, the occupants of the cramped cabin growing restless. Though the snow had weakened to flurries, the drifts outside remained impassable. And busied herself tidying up, needing to distract her mind. She swept the floor, sorted cabinets, did anything to appear occupied. In truth, her thoughts strayed constantly to Emma, alone and desperately ill back home. Each passing hour heightened Anne's worry and desperation. "Hey Anne, got any food around here?" Jason asked, interrupting her anxious thoughts. "We're starving." The other travelers chimed in with their own rumbling stomachs, and forced a polite smile. "Let me see what I can find," she said, returning to the kitchen. She was far from hungry herself, too consumed with concern for Emma. But she rummaged through the cabinets, cobbling together crackers, canned soup, and baked beans into a makeshift meal for the group. As they ate, her companions made more small talk. Where was Anne headed in this weather? Was she visiting family for the holidays? It was Christmas Eve, after all. And deflected their questions, not wanting to arouse suspicion. She needed to get back to Emma immediately, yet couldn't appear too eager with these strangers. "What about you?" she asked, diverting attention. "Any big holiday plans?" They chatted about visiting siblings, parents, grandchildren, and nodded along, feigning interest. Inside, she was screaming. The longer this went on, the more danger for Emma. Afternoon faded into evening. Her companions dozed or stared at their silent cell phones, seeking signals, and scrubbed counters for the 10th time, unable to sit still. She kept glancing out the window, willing the snow to stop completely. But it persisted like flurries in the air, the ground still buried. When she could take it no longer, and announced she was going to try digging out her car, the travelers offered to help. Together they trekked out into the biting cold, making pitiful progress against the deep, heavy drifts. After an hour, all they had done was expose the rear bumper. Exhausted and frozen, they retreated back inside and fought waves of panic and fury. So close to home, yet still trapped. There had to be a way to conquer these obstacles. Emma needed her, she had to push through. As evening fell, the travelers prepared for another night in the cabin, while Anne brooded in the corner. She would get home somehow, no matter what it took. Emma's life depended on it. Chapter 7. Morning dawned after another long, restless night for Anne. She lay awake listening to the steady breathing of her 5 cabin companions, sunk in slumber. The cold daylight filtering through the blinds revealed no let-up snow still swirling outside, the ground buried deep. As the others finally stirred, and busied herself making coffee and preparing another makeshift meal, hoping to keep up morale. But inside her gut twisted tighter each minute she remained trapped here. Emma had now gone 2 days alone at home without food, water, or her intravenous medications. Even if she survived, irreparable harm may have already been done. And yet still the roads remained impassable, and was no closer to getting back home than the previous night. The helplessness threatened to consume her. "Crazy storm, huh?" Aiden commented over breakfast. "Good thing we found this cabin when we did." The others chimed in with their gratitude and amazement at the historic blizzard, and forced a weak smile, trying her best to appear polite while agony clawed inside. She just needed this storm to clear, now. After breakfast, Scott broached the subject that made Anne's blood run cold. "We should do something to thank Anne for taking us all in," he said. "Maybe we can head to her place after this clears and help shovel or bring food." The group nodded and looked to Anne eagerly. She froze. "Oh, that's very kind, but not necessary," she managed weakly. "We want to help somehow," Clara pressed. "Where were you headed before getting stranded? Do you have family waiting or someone who needs looking in on?" Anne's heart pounded. This was the scenario she dreaded most, well-meaning assistance that could destroy everything. "No, it's fine," she insisted, struggling to keep her voice even. "I'm sure your families are just eager for your safe return as well." The travelers looked puzzled by her resistance. Scott and Jason shared a glance. "No offense, Anne, but you seem awfully desperate to avoid going home," Scott said slowly. "Is there some reason you can't share the location? Somebody there who needs help?" Anne froze. This was the opponent launching a direct attack on her secrecy, the very thing protecting Emma. She scrambled for a response that would satisfy them without revealing the truth. But nothing sufficed except an outright lie. I had a fight with my mother right before leaving for this trip, she stammered, the words sounding unnatural. I just can't face her yet, but I'm sure she's fine. Scott studied her closely. So there's no one else at your place who would need looking in on, he prodded. And met his gaze unflinchingly. No, absolutely not. They seemed to accept this, dropping the subject. But the damage was done. Now these strangers were suspicious, scrutinizing her guarded behavior. One slip up, and they could expose everything. And had to take back control. As soon as travel was possible, she needed to get these people out of here and speed home before they had a chance to intervene. Emma's fate and Anne's depended on it. The deadly opponent had launched a near-fatal strike, but Anne refused to go down without a fight. Chapter 8. After the tense confrontation, Anne busied herself cleaning dishes just for something to do. Her hands shook slightly as she scrubbed plates, keenly aware of the travelers' gazes following her around the small cabin. They knew she was hiding something about where she'd been headed in the storm. Their offers to help felt less like kindness now and more like a threat. One wrong move could expose Emma's condition and destroy everything Anne had sacrificed to care for her daughter at home. As Anne vigorously wiped down counters for the third time, Clara approached gingerly and touched her shoulder. Anne flinched involuntarily. "Hey, we didn't mean to upset you earlier," Clara said gently. "We can tell you're under a lot of strain for some reason. If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. We just want you to know we're on your side." And nodded silently, not meeting her eyes. "Try to get some rest, okay?" Clara gave Anne's shoulder a sympathetic pat before moving away. Anne's throat tightened as she continued scrubbing the pristine counters. She was touched by Clara's kindness, but knew better than to let her guard down. All it would take is one skeptical inquiry from the wrong person, one anonymous call about a sick girl at her home, and everything would come crashing down. Emma would be ripped away to the ICU, her careful balance destroyed. The dangerous snowstorm seemed to be loosening its grip, but now a new opponent had emerged inside these very walls. Suspicion. If Anne said too much, she was doomed. But refusing to engage at all only heightened scrutiny. She was trapped, her secrets under attack from all sides. Exhausted and running out of lies, and had no choice but to retreat wordlessly to the corner. Let them talk among themselves and eventually forget their concerns, she hoped. It was the only play left any direct defense could undo her. She spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact, mumbling one-word responses when addressed. The travelers eventually gave up attempting to draw her out. Anne curled up on the couch, pretending to sleep, while silently strategizing her escape from this place. She had to get out and away from these people as soon as the snow relented enough to drive. Tell them she needed to get back to the hospital for her next shift. She could deal with Emma first, stabilize her condition, then come up with a viable long-term solution. But step one was fleeing before too much suspicion arose. Failure was not an option. Emma's life hung in the balance. Chapter 9. On the third morning in the cabin, Anne rose before the others, nerves too on edge to rest any longer. She splashed cold water on her face and forced down some stale crackers, knowing she'd need energy for the impending escape. Peering outside, she saw about a foot of new snow had fallen overnight. But the skies were finally clear, only a light flurry swirling now. If she could get some traction, her car might be able to get out. As the travelers stirred and put water on for coffee, then quickly bundled up to head outside. She had to get to the main road while the conditions were still in her favor. "Where are you off to?" Aiden asked, noticing her hurry. "Just getting some fresh air," Anne replied vaguely. She slipped out before more questions came, breathing easier once alone outside. The icy air filled her lungs, sharpening her senses. She trudged to her car, shovel in hand, and began digging it out. After nearly an hour of grueling work, she finally unearthed the vehicle and brushed off the caked snow. Relief flooded through her. The drifted driveway still posed a challenge, but she could back out to the road if she gunned it. Freedom was finally within reach. And stomped back inside, drawing curious looks from the travelers sitting around the wood stove sipping coffee. She avoided their eyes as she grabbed her bag and keys. "You heading out?" Aiden asked. "Yes, got my car dug out," Anne said over her shoulder, moving towards the door. "I appreciate you all, but need to get to the hospital for my shift." "In this weather?" Scott said skeptically. "Can you call in?" And tensed. "It's been too many days already. I really need to get back." Before they could object further, she slipped outside, letting the door bang shut behind her. She hurried to the car and tossed her bag inside. Suddenly, Clara emerged from the cabin, waving her arms. "And wait," she called out. And froze, pulse racing. She forced a neutral expression as Clara approached. "Please, Anne, I know you're in some kind of trouble," Clara said breathlessly. "Let us help you. Don't go off alone. Wherever you're going, we can come." And took a step back, heart hammered. Were they really so suspicious they'd follow her home? She eyed the shovel leaning against the cabin wall. A disturbing instinct flickered through her mind. No, she couldn't seriously be considering. Violence wouldn't solve this. But she had to silence Clara's dangerous appeals and escape quickly before the others emerged. Thinking fast, and met Clara's gaze with a sad smile. "You're very kind," she said softly. "But this is my burden to bear. Please, go back inside and stay safe." Looking unconvinced, Clara finally retreated and gulped icy air, hands shaking. That had been too close. She jumped in the car and sped off down the snow-packed driveway before any others appeared, not looking back. And was in survival mode now. She would make it home to Emma, whatever the cost. Chapter 10. The windshield wipers worked furiously to clear the swirling snow as Anne careened down the rural backroads. She white-knuckled the steering wheel, focused solely on getting home to Emma. The streets remained mostly deserted, everyone wisely staying off the roads after the blizzard. Anne took advantage, pushing the speed limit and ignoring stop signs in her haste. Finally, she turned down the long, winding driveway leading to her house. The road was buried under at least 2 feet of snow. Flooring the gas pedal, Anne's car fishtailed violently on the slick surface before breaking through the deep drifts. After a grueling crawl, she pulled into the garage and leapt from the car, heart pounding. She burst inside to the darkened living room. "Emma!" Anne cried out. "I'm here, sweetheart." Only silence answered. Fear gripped Anne's chest as she rushed to the bedroom and threw open the door. There lay Emma, ghostly pale against the sheets, eyes sunken and lips cracked. Her emaciated frame was utterly still. "No, no, no," and rushed to her side, grabbing her hand. "Emma, stay with me." She frantically felt for a pulse, praying. A faint, slow heartbeat pulsed against her shaking fingertips, and exhaled in desperate relief. Still alive, but just barely hanging on. Quickly, Anne tended to her, changing the soiled sheets, cleaning her up, hooking up a new four. As she worked, hot tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Emma," she choked out. "I won't leave you again, I promise." Gently stroking the girl's cheek, Anne's grief hardened into steely resolve. She would destroy anything and anyone who tried to come between her and caring for Emma. Those stranded travelers, if they followed here, would not leave alive. This was a battle she refused to lose. Over the next few hours, Anne cared for Emma without pause, feeding her, administering medications, changing bandages. The girl remained unresponsive, but Anne kept up a comforting stream of one-sided conversation anyway. Dusk fell, and peered out the window anxiously, scanning for any sign of the travelers. She had left them stranded and suspicious. There was no telling what they might do. Her phone buzzed a call from the hospital asking where she'd been the past few days, and silenced it. She had no time for meaningless obligations now. Only Emma mattered. She sat vigil at the living room window as night deepened, shotgun across her lap, ready to defend Emma at all costs. The isolation provided an odd sense of relief. Just her and her daughter again, no more lying or evasion. Finally alone in their secret world. Whatever battle lay ahead, Anne was prepared to fight. For Emma, she would triumph, or they would go down together. Chapter 11. Overnight, the snow tapered off completely, leaving behind massive drifts that would take days to clear. Anne hardly noticed the break in the storm. She remained fixated on the window, shotgun in hand, prepared to defend Emma from any intruder. But as daylight filtered in, revealing no sign of visitors on the long driveway, Anne's taut muscles finally began to uncoil. The more time passed without incident, the more she accepted they were safe for now at least. Those stranded travelers must have given up their pursuit. Still, she knew the dangers were far from over. A suspicious inquiry could arise at any time, especially if she failed to show up for work at the hospital again. Out here in secluded rural farmland, a random check by police or emergency services was rare but not out of the question. And what if Dana, the neighbor, took it upon herself to intervene? The risks were everywhere. Yet as Anne sat keeping watch, she recognized a deeper truth growing roots inside her. She no longer cared if her actions were deemed wrong or unethical. She would do anything, lie, steal, even kill to protect Emma and their way of life together. The realization shocked but empowered her. All those years working as a nurse, abiding by and enforcing rules, now seemed petty and meaningless. Emma was all that mattered. Anne glanced down at the firearm in her hands. Just holding it made her feel in control of their fate again. She had power to shape their reality as needed, to cut down external threats. No more hiding in fear. Emma depended on her. The rest of the world and its judgment meant nothing now. She had shed her former self, paranoid, avoiding, subordinate. Now she would face the future with clarity and conviction. And gazed at her sleeping daughter, tracing the sharp lines of her face, so delicate yet so resilient. A swell of devotion rose in Anne's chest. "It's you and me, Emma," she whispered fiercely. "You just keep fighting. Leave the rest to me." She would cultivate their secret world and see that Emma stayed safe. Whatever sacrifice was required, and would pay it gladly. This truth had taken root in her soul, unshakable now. Come what may, she would stand ready to fight for her daughter, and heaven help those who dared stand in her way. Chapter 12. Over the next few days, Anne remained hypervigilant for any signs of intruders. But the long driveway stayed deserted, the snow cover revealing no fresh tracks. Their isolated house was cocooned, cut off from the outside world. Donna didn't come by, likely scared off by the shotgun Anne had brandished when she appeared after the storm. No more calls came from the hospital either. For the moment, their absence of scrutiny felt like a blessing. Emma's condition plateaued, neither improving nor worsening. She drifted in and out of consciousness, while Anne cared for her round the clock. Their world narrowed down to just this one girl, suspended precariously between life and death. Nothing else mattered to Anne but preserving this delicate balance. One afternoon, while sitting bedside, Anne noticed Emma's cheeks looking slightly fuller, less gaunt than before. Encouraged, she gently tried spoon-feeding her some broth. To her elation, Emma managed several swallows before lapsing back into stupor. It was the first real nourishment she'd taken in over a week, and marked it as a milestone. Others would say Emma still had one foot in the grave, by all reasonable accounts. But Anne saw only signs of life in the subtlest of motions, the faint twitch of her fingers, the fluttering of eyelids. It was enough. Where others saw tragedy, she saw only reason to keep fighting. So when loud knocking came at the front door later that evening, Anne responded on instinct, shotgun cocked and raised. She peered out to see Scott and Jason on the porch, waving their arms urgently. The two brothers from the cabin. Her primal urge was to fire on the spot, eliminating the threat. But she stayed her hand, instead cracking the door to demand what they wanted. They spoke of concern, coming to check on her well-being. But she saw only menace in their intentions. These two threatened the delicate balance Emma depended on. Anne's choices flashed before her with moral clarity. Let them in to keep up appearances, though it endangered Emma's recovery. Or turn them away forcibly, by any means necessary. In her heart, Anne already knew the only choice. These men had to die. Right here, right now. It was the only way to truly protect her daughter. Any shred of doubt or uncertainty had evaporated. She raised the shotgun, point blank. As the deafening blast rang out, Anne felt no fear or regret, only relief. The secret world was safe again. Chapter 13. Anne stared down impassively at the two bodies sprawled on the snowy porch. The echoing blast still rang in her ears. Her hands, steady on the smoking shotgun, betrayed no hesitation or remorse. This was necessity, clear and simple. Methodically, she dragged the lifeless forms around the side of the house, away from view. She would have to dispose of them properly later. For now, this would buy time and preserve appearances. Back inside, Anne locked the door and sank down against it, finally allowing herself to process the gravity of what she'd done. Two men were dead by her hand. Self-defense was hardly a justifiable argument. But still, she felt no guilt, only a sense of resolution. Emma remained her sole priority, her reason for living. These men had posed a direct threat to her daughter's fragile health. and did what any mother would, eliminated the danger. Steadying her shaking hands, and rose and returned to the bedroom. Emma appeared unchanged, her wheezing breaths the only motion in the dim room. Anne checked her foreline and vitals, speaking soothing words even if Emma couldn't hear. Things would return to normal now. Whatever this new version of normal meant didn't matter. Anne knew her purpose: preserve their isolated world, keep Emma comfortable. Let the rest of the world and its nosy citizens pass judgment. She would tune them out. Over the following days, Anne fell into a steady routine of care for Emma. She took cover under darkness to gradually dispose of the bodies in a nearby ravine. When Donna appeared again and waved the shotgun to make clear this place was off limits. Even in town running errands, she kept her head down, avoiding conversation or eye contact. Their world narrowed down to this house, this room, this girl suspended between life and death, and cherished each subtle sign of Emma's spirit, persisting the flutter of an eyelid, the twitch of a finger. Each was a small victory. Outsiders did not understand what she and Emma shared, but that was fine, and had created the secret equilibrium that was right for them, that kept Emma alive another day. This new normal felt meant to be. Whatever sacrifice was required to maintain it, and would give willingly. She finally had clarity of purpose. That was all that mattered now. Chapter 14. Anne gazed out the frost-lined window as the first rays of dawn filtered through the bare trees. It had been 2 weeks since the incident with Scott and Jason. In that time, the outside world had mostly forgotten they existed, leaving Anne and Emma in isolation. Just how she wanted it. Anne moved softly to the bedroom to check on Emma. Her condition remained precariously balanced between life and death, but she clung to existence with quiet resilience. For now, Anne celebrated each new day Emma survived, every labored breath a miracle. As Anne gently changed the bedsheets, Emma's eyes fluttered briefly open, scanning the room without focus before falling closed again. But it was the most sustained consciousness she'd shown in days. Anne's heart swelled. "Good morning, sweetheart," she murmured. "I'm still right here." She finished tending to Emma, then went to prepare her morning medicines and a light broth, and hummed softly as she worked, feeling a sense of lightness and purpose. Bringing the tray to the bedroom, she managed to coax several spoonfuls of broth into Emma's mouth. The rest would come through the foreline, but any bit of real nourishment made a victory. After she'd done all she could for now, and simply sat bedside, enveloped in the peace of this room. Golden dawn light filtered through the curtains, catching drifting dust specks. Emma's chest rose and fell gently, the rhythmic wheezing breaths a comforting background track. Anne was content. For so long she had been driven by fear and desperation, needing to get home, hiding Emma's illness, eliminating threats. But that fierce tension had faded, replaced by soft devotion and protective acceptance. However long Emma needed this care, Anne would provide it. However long their isolation must last, she would maintain it. She desired nothing more now than being exactly where she was, silently tending to her ailing daughter in their cocoon apart from the outside world. All her energy went to keeping Emma's fragile body sustained. Beyond that, only the present moment mattered. The future was a hazy abstraction. Gently stroking Emma's hair, Anne had full clarity that this was her life's meaning now. She wanted nothing more or different. Just this always. Chapter 15. Over the following weeks, Anne settled into a rhythm caring for Emma. Her days revolved around administering medications, changing bandages and 4 lines, preparing bland soft foods, keeping her clean and comfortable. She learned to interpret the subtle cues. A faint moan signaled pain. Blinking eyes indicated consciousness. In these quiet moments together, the outside world faded away. When not tending to Emma, and passed the time reading, listening to music, or simply sitting bedside noting each labored breath, she ventured out only when absolutely necessary under cover of night to get supplies, shovel snow, maintain the illusion of normalcy. But even these brief excursions away felt jarring. Her place was here with Emma, and couldn't recall the last time she'd spoken to someone besides Emma. Her old life as a nurse, once so full of friends and obligations, now seemed to belong to a different person entirely. She dwelled in the present, keeping vigil over her daughter, noting each new day survived. One morning, while changing the 4-line, and accidentally pierced Emma's skin, producing a thin trickle of blood. The visceral reaction came instinctively. She pressed her lips to the wound, stemming the flow. Tasting iron on her tongue, time seemed to freeze. She became aware suddenly that her old self was gone. She was a different person now, single-minded and devoted, in ways her past self could never have predicted or understood. That former Anne had been bounded by rules, expectations, and societal roles. But in this room, those externals ceased to exist. Here, she had shed old identities to become someone forged purely of instinct, fierce, protective, and isolated. Someone capable of anything for love of her dying daughter. And lifted her head slowly. The bleeding had stopped. She brushed Emma's hair gently back from her pale forehead. A sense of odd liberation coursed through her, though it meant sacrificing everything from her past self's world. "We have all we need right here," she whispered. Emma's fingers twitched slightly in response. It was enough. Chapter 16. Spring's thaw gradually melted the monumental snowdrifts surrounding the isolated house, and observed the changing seasons from the bedroom window. Soon the outside world would stir back to life. She dreaded what inquiries or unannounced visits the warmer weather might bring. Donna, the neighbor, or authorities doing welfare checks after Scott and Jason's disappearance, and knew she must prepare for threats to their sanctuary. Securing Emma comfortably in bed, and ventured outside to take stock of vulnerabilities. She scouted the perimeter, searching for any signs of intrusion during the winter isolation. Finding none offered some relief. Next, she took inventory of the shotgun shells and other supplies. She chopped firewood and cleaned up any lingering evidence around the property. Satisfied things were in order, and checked on Emma one last time before night fell. She appeared the same, stable but frail, and kissed her cool forehead and dimmed the lights, then took up her post, keeping watch through the night. A few hours before dawn, a flashlight's beam cut through the darkness down the driveway. Adrenaline spiked through Anne's veins as she watched a lone figure approach. Likely just a curious hiker who had wandered astray, but she took no chances, meeting them at the porch with shotgun raised. "Go away, this is private property," she called out sharply. The figure raised its hands, moving into the light. Anne's stomach dropped as she recognized Clara, the woman from the cabin. Time seemed to slow. "Anne, it's me," Clara said shakily. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been so worried." And stared down the barrel at her, emotions swirling: anger, fear, regret. But she did not waver. "You need to leave now," she commanded. "And don't come back." Clara looked ready to argue, but saw the resolve in Anne's eyes. She backed away slowly, retreating into the night until the darkness swallowed her. Anne exhaled, limbs shaking from adrenaline. This was only the first battle as the world awoke from winter slumber. More would be coming. But she had clarity now. She would eliminate all threats to their isolated sanctuary, no matter who begged or bargained. Emma's fragile life depended on secrecy and solitude. Anne would defend that at any cost. With unwavering conviction, she resumed her tireless watch until dawn's light rose, keeping darkness and danger at bay. Chapter 17. Spring bloomed in full glory outside the secluded house, buds flowering on bare branches and green grass sprouting. But inside was perpetual twilight. Anne kept the curtains drawn as she moved through the quiet rooms tending to waning Emma. She worked methodically, monitoring vitals, administering fluids and medications, changing soiled linens, keeping her charge clean and comfortable. Only the rasping wheeze of Emma's strained breaths and soft murmurs of Anne's one-sided conversation broke the muffled silence. To the outside world peering in, the situation would be cause for alarm and intervention. A severely ill teenager deprived of proper medical care, held in seclusion by a woman unraveling. But the closed curtains shielded any prying eyes from glimpsing the full disturbing scene. Even Donna, the once friendly neighbor, knew better than to come knocking after dark glimpses of Anne's unraveling. She had distanced herself from the strange happenings in that house since the brutal winter, wanting no part of whatever darkness festered inside. But bit by bit, threads of truth leaked out through cryptic comments she made in town. Whispers circulated about the reclusive nurse and her sick daughter shut away from the world. The rumors accelerated after Clara came speaking of her unease. Speculation brewed, fueled by lurid imagination. But no one dared approach directly or peer too closely behind the curtains. An unspoken communal revelation settled in something tragic and sinister lurked inside that house. And it was best left alone, untouched. So the inhabitants of the small rural town continued on with their idyllic daily rhythms, willfully avoiding the inexplicable strangeness next door. Their lives flowed around the island of shadow, giving it wide berth. Only Anne knew the full truth of what transpired within those walls. Outsiders judged based on fragmented gossip, but she saw with moral clarity. She was fulfilling her purpose, keeping Emma sustained against impossible odds. That was all that mattered, no matter what others might wrongly imagine. Let them speculate and whisper, and focused only on the task at hand, comforting Emma as days dwindled in darkness. The curtain must hold for as long as fate allowed. Chapter 18. Sheriff Grant sipped his coffee, trying to ignore the stares of patrons around him. Ever since Clara had come to him with concerns about Anne's bizarre behavior, the whole town was on edge, awaiting some kind of resolution. But his hands were tied unless an actual crime was reported. Rumors had swirled for months about Anne and her sick daughter shut away in that house. But nothing substantial enough to justify intervention, as much as he might want to check on them. He sighed, setting down his mug. Legally, there was nothing he could do unless new evidence emerged. But the shared sense of unease was becoming unbearable. Finally, Grant stood, leaving money for his coffee. Heading out to the car, he made a decision he would pay Anna a visit himself, make sure she and her daughter were all right. It was hardly official police business, but might provide some reassurance. The gravel driveway was steep and rutted, branches scratching the car's sides as he approached the isolated property. It looked neglected, weeds overgrown, piles of debris scattered about. He knocked loudly on the front door. After a lengthy wait, it cracked open to reveal a sliver of Anne's face, her expression hidden in shadow. Grant introduced himself neutrally, saying neighbors were concerned, and he just wanted to be sure she was okay, and insisted all was fine. But as he continued to make conversation, her tone grew increasingly terse. He tried peering past her into the dark home, but could see nothing. Sensing he wasn't wanted, Grant reluctantly excused himself and turned to leave. But a question burned on his tongue. Anne, did Scott and Jason ever show up here after the blizzard? Her face betrayed a flicker of alarm before shutting down. No, I told you no one comes here, she said sharply before slamming the door. Unease swirled in Grant's gut as he walked to his car. Something was very wrong here. He could feel it. But suspicions did not constitute cause for a warrant. For now, he was powerless. Starting the engine, Grant looked back once more at the dilapidated home, barely visible through the overgrown brush. A shared revelation had taken root. Evil dwelled there. But its true nature remained in shadow, glimpsed only at the corners. With a heavy heart, Grant drove away, fervently hoping evidence would surface before darker secrets were revealed. Chapter 19. Emma grew weaker and more hollowed by the day in her curtained sick room. Some nights and feared sunrise would find her departed. But each morning the labored wheezing continued, the only discernible motion in her withered frame. Watching Emma cling so tenaciously to each breath and matched her fight to live with tireless diligence in her care. Their world narrowed down to this cocooned bedroom and the simple rhythms of sustaining fragile life just one more day. Outside scrutiny hardly concerned it anymore. They had achieved their own equilibrium on the precipice between existence and oblivion, impervious to external prodding. Sheriff Grant's inquiry resonated as only a faint, distant thud against the walls fortifying their isolation. Let him and the rest speculate in hushed tones. It made no difference to it now. Past and future carried little meaning in the velvet dusk that swaddled them. Her community was this bedside, administering medicines, changing soiled garments, fluffing pillows, keeping her charge clean and comfortable. She tracked each subtle shift in Emma's condition, the angle of her drooping wrists, the cadence of her breaths, faint moans signaling distress, and answered these cues with soft psalms and soothing words whispered close. During rare moments of alertness, Emma's roving eyes found Anne's face, recognition kindling faintly in their depths before slipping away again. Even these brief connections fortified Anne's tired spirit. In the quiet intervals between motions, she rested her head near Emma's chest, keeping vigil over the strained heartbeat within, so determined despite all odds. This was their shared purpose, now cultivating stillness and preserving a dying flicker. Beyond this room, nothing mattered. Let the world outside murmur and scrutinize. And had found her place. Here she would remain, guarding the thin membrane between now and what lay beyond. Chapter 20. A new spring dawned, yet light did not reach inside the shuttered house wherein maintained her solitary vigil. Some nights her mind wandered through those distorted middle months when desperation drove her to violence. She pondered chances missed, choices not taken. But the remorse always faded with morning's light. Given the same circumstances again, she knew her actions would align the same. She had protected what mattered most at any cost. Emma's body had withered to a skeletal shell, but still she clung to tenuous life, each day a small triumph of will over certain decay, and admired her quiet tenacity. She matched it with steadfast tending to every need and comfort as the outside world faded to abstraction. Continued rumors swirled in hushed tones beyond the curtained walls, speculative theories stacking upon morbid conjecture. Sometimes reaching ears warped details into accusations steeped in fear. But truth lay bedside, dwelling in the liminal space between two entwined heartbeats, increasingly out of sync, and rested her cheek against Emma's sunken chest, tracking the strain of clicks and whistles within. She synchronized her breathing, closing her eyes to join Emma in the oasis of now, forgetting past and future. Dimly, she registered her charge's heartbeat slowing, the intervals between pumps lengthening. Stillness settled, peaceful, and profound. No more medications or changes were needed. Their work was ending. With reverent care, Anne nestled herself closer, softly stroking Emma's limp arm. No words came, only a sense of arrival at destination's end, a path traversed and purpose fulfilled. Gradually, the struggling rhythm slowed, then went silent. And lay still, letting the emptiness expand until it flowed through her also. Clarity settled in its wake. Her task was complete. She was done. Calmly, Anne rose on creaking limbs to open shutters and curtains. Morning sun flooded the room, illuminating Emma's face, smooth and untroubled in repose, and bent to kiss her cool forehead. Then she turned away without looking back, stepping into warm sunlight. Outside, calls of birdsong and scent of new blossoms greeted her. She walked steadily onward into whatever lay ahead. Chapter 21. In the weeks following Emma's death, an eerie calm settled over the remote home where she'd spent her final days, and went through the motions of tidying, sorting belongings, making arrangements. But her mind and heart had gone numb. She declined the county's offer to pay for a proper burial. Emma was cremated simply, her ashes interred under the elm tree she'd loved climbing as a child, and placed one engraved stone to mark the spot. Then the house was sterilized and listed for sale. She donated most possessions, keeping only a few sentimental items. While packing up the kitchen, Anne uncovered a forgotten bottle of sleeping pills. She contemplated it for some time before emptying the entire contents into her mouth. As she lay down on Emma's freshly laundered bed, sorrow and relief mingled, knowing she would soon join her daughter. But fate had other plans, and awoke days later in a hospital room, pumps clicking and monitors beeping. Authorities came with questions about the strange happenings in her home over the past year, gazing with thinly veiled judgment. But Anne remained numb, answering in robotic monotone. Nothing could touch her now. Discharged at last, she drifted from motel to motel, existing without purpose. Food and drink brought no pleasure. She sought only the solace of sleep and dreams where Emma waited, vital and happy once more. Weeks passed aimlessly until late one night, an impulse guided Anne's steps to the edge of a precipice high above the black rushing river. As she teetered on the crumbling brink, Emma's face flashed in memory, beckoning, and spread her arms and stepped forward into open air, the cold rush of wind, then water, dragging her down to peaceful oblivion. Somewhere in town, rumors sparked anew about the strange recluse woman. But her story faded with time as lives moved on. Only the etched gravestone under the elm recalled she had walked this earth, devoted unto death to one purpose, a daughter named Emma, now gone but unforgotten. Their fates forever entwined here and beyond. The end.